Hey guys, it's Hink here. Everybody knows that size matters. I mean, whether we want to admit it or not, guys, size matters. But the question is, are we measuring correctly? And honestly, is there a better way we can measure? So especially for my guys in the enlargement community, is there a better way we can track our measurements? So that's what we're going to discuss today, the best, the most efficient, and the most effective way to measure. So stay tuned. All right, guys, so I was going through a lot of the literature and I came across some kind of interesting data and I started formulating this hypothesis in my mind. And so we all know that basically anybody that's trying to enlarge themselves, there's always a question of like, what is the best, most scientific way to do this? And so in general, the theory is something that's called bone pressed measurement, where you basically take a ruler, press it as far as you can into your fat pad, and then measure with an erection. And, that is your basically erect measurement. There's also something that's called non-bone pressed, where you basically just put the ruler up to like the skin of your pubic bone. You don't press it in and just measure your non-bone pressed measurement, okay? And so those are historically the best ways to measure erect length. But if you actually look into the scientific data, like here's a paper that I'll put up here where it's called like Am I Normal? And it goes through like basically size distributions, and it talks in one of the sections about ways to measure. And there's something that's called stretched flaccid length, where you basically just take your flaccid penis, pull it taut, and measure that distance. And they oftentimes in the medical literature use that as a surrogate data, meaning they basically assume that your stretched flaccid length is going to equal your erect length. Well, there's a question of, should we be doing that? And so as part of this paper I was talking about, they actually went so far as to say that they found, Chin et al., a minimal tension force of 450 grams during stretching of the penis was required to reach a full potential erection length, okay? And so they were trying to actually calculate basically how much tension do you need to pull with in order to accurately represent what your actual erect penile measurement is. So guys, I'll ask you, please let me know in the comments, how many of you guys out there will actually know what 450 grams of tension is going to feel like? Yes, I suppose one could get a scale or one could get some sort of pulley device and put on 450 grams and kind of guesstimate that way, but that's just not realistic. And so more importantly, in this paper, they actually talk about how there's all these discrepancies. This may account for discrepancy observed in 3 out of 4 of our present studies, which measured stretched and erect length simultaneously and found that the erect length was longer than the stretched flaccid length. I'm not going to go through all the papers, guys, but there's actually a lot of conflicting evidence. Some of the papers show that stretched flaccid length is longer than the patient's erect length. Some of them show that erect length is actually longer than stretched flaccid length. And so I don't think that measuring stretched flaccid length is going to be something that's going to be that beneficial. Now, it is, I think, if you can find a reliable, reproducible way where you're pulling with the same amount every time, that the ruler's in the same place, I do think there's some merit to it. I know that, me and Perv kind of went back and forth on our podcast because he believes that you can basically measure stretched flaccid length down to almost the millimeter or millimeter, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think you can do that. And, I've been wrong more than my fair share of times. And so I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. I just think that for the average person, having a reproducible stretched flaccid measurement, it's not something that's really that feasible, guys. And that's honestly like what the literature backs as well. So that's why we need to come up with a better method. Even when you look at papers like here's an extender study here, and fortunately they do measure flaccid, stretched flaccid, and erect length, but once again, a lot of these papers that are actually measuring penis size are using a stretched flaccid length. And there's absolutely a correlate. So when it comes to enlargement, personally, I think that your stretched flaccid length is going to basically precede your actual erect gains. And so if you start PE and the first thing you notice is that your stretched flaccid length should increase pretty significantly. And so for me, it was about 4 to 6 month catch up between when my erect length actually started measuring my stretched flaccid length. That's what I think. That's another video for another day. Here's where the interesting thing comes in. By the time this video is up, I will have already put out my video about anti-lysyl oxidase and the studies that they've done in rats. But what they talk about is actually how they measured rat penis size in these studies to show that length was actually increasing. And so in this study, I think they had the most accurate way to measure penis size. What they talked about is, here's a quote: "Compared with conventional methods of stretched penis measurement, the measurement of penile length with a syringe is simple, less prone to inter-individual variation, and more reproducible." Every time I read these quotes, I feel like half you guys think I'm illiterate. Look, reading is not my strong suit, especially in front of a camera, but it is what it is, guys. In this article, and I'll put up some pictures here. You can see where they actually used a syringe to create negative pressure to basically mimic an erect length. And that is what they used as basically their standard measurement. What I am proposing is that the standard measurement for measuring your progress, for showing before and afters, whatever it may be, I propose that a new standard measurement be pumping to approximately 100 to 150 millimeters of mercury, or basically anywhere between 4 to 5 inches of mercury. That is what represents, here's a paper here that shows that when you actually have an erection, that's right around the range of what your normal erection pressure should be. And so that's what's literally going to mimic an erection. So we can induce an artificial erection in the pump, and then you measure that in the pump, okay? I know what you're saying, Hink, it's full of flaws, but just stay with me here, okay? So one of the biggest issues that you see is like, so anybody that posted before and after, even my before and afters, fortunately, I think I do a pretty good job of like reproducing everything as far as lighting, angle, everything. But there's still guys that are like, oh, well, your gains are just because of benefits from like improved erection quality. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that because, certain supplements, if you take them for a longer period of time, like citrulline or PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra, it actually shows that over time you actually build better erection quality. And so if you are using a pump and using the negative pressure of the pump to inflate your penis to the same erection quality level, when you use that negative pressure, 6 inches of mercury is going to be the same 6 inches of mercury. And so it kind of takes erection quality discrepancies out of the question, okay? So it does away with that. I definitely think it's far more reproducible and far more accurate than stretch flaccid because, my stretch flaccid is probably about at least a half an inch bigger, more or less, than my actual erect size. And so I don't think you can just be like, oh, look, this is working because my stretch flaccid. If you actually induce an erection using this new pump measurement I'm describing, then I think that it is far more reproducible. I think that it is more standardized, and even it takes into account fat pad, because when you pump to that negative pressure, that pump is going to be creating basically a bone pressed measurement because the pump is actually going into the pelvis, and part of that negative pressure is actually pushing down. And so you are getting pretty close to a bone pressed measurement. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. And so, let's just call this the Hink method of measurements, okay? What would I propose? And so here's what I would propose as basically one of the ways to start your measurements, okay? So number one, stimulate yourself to basically get blood flowing to that area, okay? You don't need to get erect, but you also don't want to be going in the pump just 100% flaccid, okay? Once you do that, insert yourself into the pump and pump to about 5 inches of mercury, okay? I think that's a very reasonable range, 5 inches of mercury. Now, you need to keep it at this level. Now, once again, as I talked about in my pumping, explained video, part 1 and part 2, you are going to have pressure that's going to equalize. As you are drawing that blood into your member, the pressure in the outside chamber is going to normalize. And so as more blood enters your penis, the pressure in the pump is going to actually decrease. So you're going to need to pump to basically maintain that level of 5 inches of mercury. And that's why you need to set a timer for about 5 minutes, okay? Monitor the pressure and pump until you get it consistently at that 5 inches of mercury where it's not dropping down, okay? Then at that point, release the pressure in the pump, okay? You don't have to remove yourself, just release the pressure in the pump, and then wait 2 minutes, put yourself back in the pump, and just repeat that process. Start a timer start a timer and then pump till you get to 5 inches of mercury, and make sure that by the time that timer beeps, that it is stabilized and that pressure level is not changing. It's consistent right at 5 inches of mercury, and then you measure. And that is the size that you need to compare with. This is standardized, it's reproducible, it takes erection quality, it takes fat pad, essentially all of these metrics out of the equation, and you can have a reproducible measurement that way. But you have to specifically do it to those variables. So what are the criticisms of this? Because I know there's a lot, and I want to hear what you guys think about this sincerely in the comments. Do you think this is something that we can do moving forward? But before we talk about criticisms, if you guys just take a second, like and subscribe, it means a lot. My channel's going absolutely crazy right now. I'm getting a lot of subscribers. Please help the channel grow, help spread the message, guys. I appreciate you. So what are some of the criticisms? Well, number one, people are going to say,
Oh, well, this doesn't translate to real gains because it's inside a pump.
I mean, yes. And so ideally, you would measure stretch flaccid length, you would measure flaccid length, you would measure your erect size, and then you would measure this new like Hinks measurement, okay? And that way you would have standard like measurements across the board, and you should see them all going up. But I get it, okay? Because a lot of people will actually like pump themselves up in the pump and be like, look guys, I'm gaining, because their pumped length has increased, but they don't take into account things like, oh, well, you're pumping at much higher pressure now, or oh yeah, of course you're bigger inside the pump because you're pressing it down more. Like if it's one of those pumps that has the bellows at the bottom, I don't want to mention the name, but BM is the abbreviation, okay? So I get it, but I also think that it is contingent. So if you have a really big fat pad, in theory, because a ruler has a smaller diameter, I think you would be able to push it further into your pelvis, but this is still going to sink into your pelvis. But I still think with fat pad, there still is a bit more variation. But in general, I do think it's going to be reproducible. Hopefully you guys aren't fluctuating that much weight in 6 months where your fat pad is going to change, over an inch, okay? But, fat pad is still something to consider. I am thinking about redoing my Hinks trial. So many of you, aren't familiar with me, but basically on our subreddit, r/gettingbigger, I have a trial where I propose basically a standardized method of enlargement that I think is simple, it's easy to do, and I opened it up to 10 personally selected participants. Unfortunately, those participants, like the vast majority of them, let me all the way the F down, but that's okay. I still have at least 2 guys that have sent me solid data with solid results. I'm going to be reporting that shortly. Maybe a third, but he's let me down pretty much big time. Thinking about doing a Hinks trial 2.0, and so if I do that, that's definitely going to be one of the ways with which we're going to actually measure progress, okay? A couple of other potential downsides is that if you are very prone to edema, like very, very super sensitive to edema, 5 minutes, could lead to some edema accumulation, especially if you're doing 2 sets of 5 minutes, and that could artificially inflate numbers. However, once again, it's standardized. You should be getting the same amount of edema because you're doing basically 2 sets of 5 minutes and then measuring at the same pressure. So it's not like you're going to be more prone to edema because you're just pumping at that light of a pressure, okay? Another thing is you have to make sure your gauge is calibrated. I had one guy that was like, I can't stand pumping past basically 3 inches of mercury. Turns out his gauge was broken, and so he had no idea what he was pumping to. So you have to make sure your gauge is calibrated. Some people, I'm sure, are going to argue that,
Oh, well, if you just measure in the pump, then, what if by doing PE, or enlargement, you're actually decreasing your erectile function, and this is just giving you an artificial sense because even though you might be bigger, your erection quality is worse.
I mean, I'm sure like there's always that one guy, you know who you are, and you're probably the same guy in the comments. Anyways, but there's always going to be criticism. Nothing is perfect, but I do think this is better. Okay, guys, like seriously, let me know what you think. Is this stupid? Is this reproducible? Is this something that we could potentially adopt in the community and make a more like scientific, objective based measurement? Or is this something where you think that guys are just gonna, post pictures of before and after in the pump? So this is a big thing here. If you were to, show your results or whatever, okay? If I were to ever publish a Hinks trial and I were to show these measured, you would have to literally document a picture. Ideally, video would be best. Ben from Mailhanger always shows like videos of his progress, so it's not, it's like harder to Photoshop, and it's much harder to fake those measurements, etc. But so ideally you would have a video of like basically showing this process, and at least a picture showing like your size at that like 5 inches of mercury if you were going to show a before and after, if you felt comfortable doing so. But like on my trial, if I were to publish results, that's what would be required, is like a picture in the pump at 5 inches of mercury. So let me know what you think, guys. Am I off my rocker here? Is this crazy? Am I just psychotic for even thinking about this? I already know I am because I spend way too much time thinking about these, but whatever. It is what it is, guys. If you need to reach me, patreon.com. Really appreciate each and every one of you guys. Sincerely, like this channel is doing more things than I ever dreamed it would. And so I really, really appreciate you guys. But until the next one, Peace and love.